the leader of the free world, right? I listened to what they said, and over those days I made up my mind and we said no. Right controls, but we've also got to change the way our economy works. So we properly enforce the minimum wage, don't allow people to be exploited and wages to be undercut.
While British coal miners face unemployment due to Labour's aggressive phase-out policies, Ed Miliband's busy flying to China for the third time, begging them to make climate commitments they have no intention of keeping. It's a tale of two priorities: working-class Britons losing livelihoods at home, while Starmer's Labour courts global elites in Davos and Beijing. Is this what you voted for when Labour promised to put British interests first? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Keir Starmer's mask slipped when he casually admitted that Davos matters more to him than Westminster. Let that sink in. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom publicly declaring his allegiance to a gathering of global elites over the institution he's meant to serve. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or an off-the-cuff remark. It was a rare moment of honesty that perfectly encapsulates Labour's true priorities.
But look, obviously we know we've got more to do, and part of what I'm doing in my job, I was out yesterday with Keir Starmer talking about our plans for new nuclear, is driving economic growth. But what I'm not going to do is repeat the mistakes of the 2003 Iraq War, which happened when Labour was in power, which is a rush to war without knowing what your strategy is.
While Starmer rubs shoulders with billionaires in the Swiss Alps, communities across Britain's coal regions face a grim reality. Labour has accelerated coal phase-out policies with little regard for the devastating economic impact. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They represent thousands of skilled workers whose livelihoods are being sacrificed at the altar of climate virtue signalling. In Yorkshire, South Wales and the Midlands, entire communities built around the coal industry now face unemployment, declining local businesses, and the hollowing out of once proud industrial towns. The hypocrisy is staggering. Labour claims to be the party of the working class, while actively dismantling industries that have sustained working-class communities for generations. Their climate policies create a self-inflicted wound on British industry, hamstringing our manufacturing sector with costs and restrictions that our competitors, particularly China, simply ignore. We're effectively outsourcing our carbon emissions along with our jobs. Look closely at Labour's pattern of behaviour. Time and again, they prioritise international climate commitments over domestic economic concerns. They'd rather earn applause at global climate conferences than face the hard questions from unemployed miners in Northumberland. The disconnect between their rhetoric about standing up for working people and their actions that directly harm those same communities couldn't be more glaring. The question we should all be asking is, who actually benefits from these policies? It certainly isn't British workers watching their industries collapse. It isn't consumers facing higher energy bills due to our increased dependence on imported energy.
Making promises on an IOU. And that's why we've said we'll have a mansion tax on homes above £2 million, crack down on tax avoidance by the hedge funds, money from the tobacco company.
Is this to try to normalise yourself? Do you see yourself as in some way not normal? Why do you need to conjure these people to make your case?
No, it's to change get out of the Westminster bubble.
The beneficiaries are the Davos crowd that Starmer is so eager to impress. Global financiers, foreign manufacturers, and political elites whose livelihoods don't depend on the industries being sacrificed. The beneficiaries of Labour's climate policies extend far beyond Davos to Beijing's corridors of power. While Keir Starmer courts global elites, Ed Miliband has been busy making pilgrimages to China, 3 separate diplomatic missions, hat in hand, supposedly securing climate commitments to justify Britain's industrial sacrifice. But these diplomatic exercises are nothing more than an elaborate charade that's costing Britain dearly. Let's look at what's actually happening on the ground while Miliband engages in futile climate diplomacy. China has been dramatically expanding its coal power capacity, even while making empty promises to adhere to international climate agreements. The contrast is stark. Labour demands British industry commit economic suicide in the name of net zero, while China builds coal plants at a pace that would make Victorian industrialists blush. This isn't merely hypocrisy, it's a calculated strategy. China has masterfully positioned itself as both climate saint and sinner. They tell Western officials what they want to hear about future emissions reductions, while simultaneously ensuring their manufacturing dominance continues unabated.
Where we've got a government that is racking up the bills of borrowing for economic failure, not to invest in schools and hospitals, we face a choice as a Labour Party. Second biggest generator of offshore wind, but we're not yet generating the jobs. Our plans, Great British Energy, the National Wealth Fund, giving incentives to invest in British manufacturing.
Political theorists have labelled Labour's approach, particularly under Miliband, as fundamentally naive. They expect China to voluntarily sacrifice its economic advantages for climate commitments, a fantasy that ignores the realities of geopolitical competition. The cunning brilliance of China's strategy goes deeper. They've cornered the market on rare earth minerals, essential for manufacturing green technology components like EV batteries and solar panels. This allows China to profit doubly from Western climate policies, first by avoiding the same restrictions placed on competing economies, and second, by dominating the supply chain for the very green technology Western nations are being pushed to adopt.
Different policy that we're talking about, John. It's a 1% pay rise on average across the public sector. It's not what the government proposed for the first period of this parliament. It's the essence of our economic crisis was a global financial crash. The Tories definitely say...
In which the Labour government played a major role. But you've been candid, you've forgotten. How could you forget something?
While Britain hamstrings its own industrial capacity with self-imposed restrictions, China expands its manufacturing without similar constraints. This creates an astonishing strategic imbalance that Labour seems utterly oblivious to. Compare this approach with America under Trump, which focused on energy independence and prioritising domestic industry rather than chasing climate agreements that disproportionately disadvantage Western economies. The contradiction lies at the heart of Labour's climate policy, their willingness to sacrifice British industrial capacity while ignoring China's strategic exploitation of these same policies. Miliband's repeated trips to Beijing reveal either a stunning naivety about international relations or a deliberate blindness to the economic damage being inflicted on British workers and industries. What we're seeing with Labour is a fundamental imbalance in their policymaking.
This government proposed action in Syria, the bombing of Syria, right? I was called into a room by David Cameron and Nick Clegg because President Obama had been on the phone. Want a majority Labour government?
It's unlikely you'll get one.
Let's see what happens. But the thing I would say is, whatever happens, I'll put forward my proposals in my manifesto. That's what I'm going to do.
As economic experts have warned, any effective climate strategy must balance environmental ambitions with protecting domestic industries and workers. Without this balance, we're simply setting up British communities for economic devastation while accomplishing nothing for the global climate. The brutal truth is that Starmer and his team are crafting policies that impress at international summits, but crush British workers at home. The question facing voters isn't about climate denial, it's about common sense. Do we want leadership that implements balanced policies protecting both our environment and economy, or leaders who'll sacrifice working communities on the altar of global approval? Britain deserves climate policies that don't deliberately handicap our industries while our competitors thrive. We need climate solutions that work for ordinary British people, not just for the applause lines at Davos. Otherwise, we're not saving the planet. We're just outsourcing both our emissions and our jobs.